welcome to our channel, where we set out to explore wonderful great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing, because why the hell not?
So today we're going to be discussing a personal favorite of mine. Actually, this is one of the writers that I got into probably when I was 17. And my whole commitment to literature was to try to understand the human nature as best as I possibly could. And what better way than to start off with some Balzac, Honoré de Balzac. And this is one of, I think, roughly 65 or so novels that kind of make up the entirety of his L'Humain de Comédie, like the Human Comedy series. So he kind of like outlines Parisian society at all different levels and kind of like shows it for the underbelly of it, I suppose. And he does a real good psychological characterization of many of the people in the books and the stories. So
this one being a more pessimistic view.
Yeah, this one is definitely not necessarily a happy one. It is considered a tragedy. But let me just give you a little bit on Balzac. So he was born in Tours in 1799. He was the son of a civil servant. Between 1820 and 1824, he wrote a number of novels under various pseudonyms. And he died in 1850, a few months after he married a Polish countess with whom he had maintained an amorous relationship for 18 years.
Oh, wow.
So, yes. Anyway, so he was a larger-than-life character. And his story here is also...
larger than life.
Yeah, there's some larger-than-life characters in this one as well.
I just felt like a good
catchphrase. It's certainly true. So, do you want me to start with my impressions?
You start.
Okay. So at first, just like I think many 19th century novels of this type, especially early 19th century, the scene is set in 1819, near the Napoleon had just lost at the Battle of Waterloo, and there was this kind of new shift in society, but it starts off like many 19th century novels, a little bit slow. It's like a lot of description as to where they are, where it's taking place, which is in a very poor boarding house somewhere in the backwater in the slums of Paris, if you will. And so there are a few characters here that we can speak of. One's Rastignac,
Yep.
and he's kind of like this young law student, and he wants to make a name for himself and make his family proud, and he comes from the countryside, from the south of France. And apparently I didn't know this, but we looked it up. The Rastignac actually is now a name for a social climber, someone who kind of like
really?
sets out to promote themselves in society and go up the sort of the ladder there, if you will, right? So anyway, so Rastignac is a law student, and he's in this boarding house, and he meets a fellow named Goriot, Père Goriot, also old Goriot, I suppose, and he's kind of like and Father Goriot, and he's kind of like the butt of all the jokes, because he lives in this very cheap boarding house, but yet he's incredibly wealthy, and he has two daughters who are actually married.
A baroness.
One was a baroness, one was a countess.
Yeah.
And so they were married to very well-off sort of financiers and bankers and somewhat aristocrats, of course. Yet he's kind of like pinching by, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, they describe like how he starts out on this suite, which was still kind of strange when he moved in, even for the landlady to see such a man with like dressed so well and so notorious for having these beautiful, wealthy daughters. But she was kind of seduced, like he didn't seduce her, but she was intrigued by him, the landlady, in the beginning. And he had the first floor, so one of the bigger rooms, and then she describes him as like almost each year he slowly goes up to the top, where
meaning like worse
and
worse as you go higher up.
Smaller and smaller rooms, less and
more
less.
dingy. Yeah. And there was some suspicion he was meeting these two beautiful young women, and there was a lot of suspicion that these were his kept women, I guess, his mistresses. Mm-hmm. But it later comes to light that those are in fact his daughters. And I should mention another character here that was also rather integral to the plot was Vautrin. And Vautrin is this very pessimistic, very cynical. I wouldn't even call him pessimistic. He's cynical.
Cynical. Yeah.
He's very cynical. I don't think he even necessarily has a pessimistic outlook. I think he's actually quite gleeful in his cynicism, like
Yeah.
because he's figured out society and how all those lofty ideals and virtuous people are actually the most horrendous people imaginable. And
he sees through everyone's egotistical veil.
Yeah,
I think is the best way to put it, and he uses them.
And the way he's a little bit intimidating because the way he presents himself is almost like very easygoing and affable and very like jovial and fun-loving, but then he pierces you with his gaze and he looks in the deep center of your soul, and if he wants to use you for something, he will use you for something, and his will is like almost like godlike. It's almost like outside of the human realm, that he can enforce his will on anybody and everybody. And another thing I should mention is that Vautrin, like this is something that Balzac was known for. I think he was one of the first to do this, but his characters actually reappear as sub-characters or side characters in many of the other stories throughout. So if he might be presenting a different narrative, down with another set of main protagonists, Vautrin would randomly be implicit somewhere. He'd be like, there'd be a subplot with Vautrin in there. And Vautrin ends up being kind of like this gateway to the underworld of Parisian society. So he is almost like the banker or the bondsman for the criminals, the vast underground, and very well connected. And so I found two particular moments that I was like, this is an unbelievable book, and this is why I love this book. And the first moment was Vautrin is giving his speech to the young lawyer Rastignac, right? About how you have to work society, and how you have to. It was a complete cynical portrayal that everything's meaningless. It was almost like nihilistic in a sense, right? Everything's meaningless, but you have to play the game for your own benefit, no matter who you step on and how many people you hurt. And that's kind of like the devil aspect, right? That Rastignac was experiencing. And then the other fatally wonderful speech or diatribe was when old Goriot, near the end of the novel, and there's he has a complete, very in-depth, almost like very revealing psychological insight on human nature, with his relationship with his daughters and his own admission of his own guilt and his own doing. I guess I don't want to spoil the end. Of course, it's very much worth a read. But one thing I wanted to say before I turned it over to you was the fact that throughout this, if you've read Shakespeare's King Lear, where he has 3 daughters, and all he wants is the love of his daughters, and they all are giving him what he wants in a way, flattering his vanity, and then the one daughter, who's the true daughter who really, really loves him, refuses to give him that, and he takes out all his rage on her. There's elements of that in this. I did feel that there was a sense. Obviously, it's not a parallel, but I felt like there was this aspect of the father-daughter relationship, and it very much, and like one of the characters said, like he was almost emblematic of fatherhood in a very like self-sacrificial way. Like I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a healthy archetype of fatherhood. He gave everything, his own, almost his blood for his daughters to be happy, but there was something there that speaks to every father, I would imagine, who loses his daughter as she grows up and gets old. She no longer becomes his. There is this pathos there where he put up so much love into his daughters only for them to grow up, and that's why he said, oh, marriage is false. Like, don't ever it's a crime against fatherhood to have your daughters marry, because they're going to get up one day and they'll be kidnapped and taken away by some strange man who won't love you the way your daughter loves you, and the daughters won't be there for you and you won't be there for them. And it was very impassioned speech, and I found that very moving. It very much captured, I could imagine, what a father would feel at the loss of a grown child, or that relationship. But tell me, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, while I love aspects of the story, I don't think I was as much of a fan as you. And I think it's because the part of it, and again, I know it's one story in many of Balzac's, I wouldn't call his like a trilogy, but they do intertwine, right? His books and his characters.
Yeah, there's like 65 of them.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's captured in another work that he has. But the one thing that I didn't like was that it didn't show a lesson of how life can also, like, through suffering, you can learn about beauty. You know, there's always a consequence to something that you gain.
Or in Rastignac's case, having learned that Parisian society is no place where virtue thrives, and so he stifles it at the end, right? Where he looks to it more at a cynical angle.
Yeah, that was my point, was that I think it's like, in order to gain anything, you have to see things in a cynical light in order to thrive in society.
Yeah.
Is the way I saw it. Yeah. And he had to give up his almost his goodness. Like there was compassion and humility in him that the other characters didn't possess. And even that's one thing out of all the character I actually did like Vautrin. What was his name? Vautrin, because he did. There was this like intelligence to him where he did see people for what they are, and in a way, although he used Rastignac to some degree to get what he wanted, he also really had quite a softness for him, which I found interesting. That he saw him, he's like, you are one of the few people who still really have compassion and kindness for your family, and those you see
a truly virtuous
see people who are doing good acts and you help them, and even though he wasn't like that, he saw the value in that, or a softness for that, and he, despite using him, he also admired him, which I found interesting. So I think, like, I would be curious to actually read another one of Balzac's stories with him and see what path Vautrin goes on, because I found his character kind of dabbled in that complexity, where the other characters, it was everything, that every path they took, whenever they had some sort of good happen to them, there was always drastically more bad, is what I found. Like, any kind of gift they were given, the negative component of it was much more great. Is the best way I can describe it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, even with Vautrin, like, you know, there was a sense... It was odd. It was jarring in a sense that when, you know, Vautrin is given up to the detective and the police as a criminal, as a thief, which he was, and the board
charged for rightly accused for crimes he willingly admitted.
Yeah.
That he committed.
The borders were very much like turned against the spies, I guess, or the ones who kind of framed him or set him up.
Interesting.
And it was interesting, but I thought about it in a sense, and you know, in a way, he shows a juxtaposition between sort of this low character, but who's very proud and has a sense of weird, in a perverse way, honor. There was like an honor among like there's, I guess, a phrase, there's no honor among thieves, right? But in a sense, like, there was something noble, I guess, about him, even though he was a kind of like a despicable character, right? And a very dangerous character. And it's juxtaposed with these very, you know, wealthy, sort of like high society people who, you know, even though they have decorum and they have manners and they have all these wonderful attributes on the surface, you know, the baseness of their behavior and their own honor. And I think there was that weird juxtaposition there. And like, this isn't a new kind of thing that writers love playing with, especially in Russian literature.
Yeah. Like
in a lot of Chekhov short stories, and even earlier, like 19th century, around this time, with like social realism and all the sort of those different ideologies, but there is almost a valorization of the thief. Like, you know how we all root for the underdog? It was kind of that sort of element. In, like, I know in Russian literature, some of the Russian literature, it's like a romanticization of the villain. And you know, there's whatever, say what you will of it, but it plays with an interesting idea about good and evil. And I suppose, can a good man be driven to do something bad, and how, we tend to think that there are very strong delineations of moral rightness and wrong, what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, and what is good and evil. And I think it plays a bit with that,
a bit,
right?
but not enough. Like, that's the part that disappointed me in the end, was, I'm not going to ruin the end, but I thought that one of the daughters would be more complex than she was. And I didn't like how she was, like, I could understand, I think it would have captured the essence of humanity better if one went down the path that the book ended the way it did, and the other one, when it was too late, again, kind of touching on that idea of the suffering helps you to see the light, kind of thing. But neither of them did. They just kind of went back to their, and that was really disappointing to me. And I think that's the pessimism that a lot of critics of the book said they also didn't like about it, was that it was a very pessimistic, nihilistic kind of way to see humanity. And I would agree that it was. Yeah, for sure. Did you learn something new, I suppose, from the reading of this? Do you have a different appreciation for Balzac? I like his writing style from beginning to end. I don't think I ever disliked any part of it. It was well written. It's absolutely well written. It's easy to read.
Yeah, and it's like he doesn't delve too much into descriptions. He's not like a Charles Dickens, which is nice. But what I found him very interesting was, like, he's very astute psychologically. Like, he does excellent character development, I would say. Like, he definitely, like, I'm not talking about development over time, like progression of or transformation stories. But I think there's a lot of, like, when I was reading this, I found a lot of insight into the human condition and just the way people think and feel.
Yeah. I think I'm just caught up on the ending being pessimistic. And I think maybe the way you have to look at it is, the moral is that anyone can be turned to this kind of pessimistic attitude.
Yeah, cynical. Right. It's all like cynical, not so much pessimistic, right? Would you say?
Yeah, cynical, I guess.
Like, it's more, it's like...
But it is pessimism too, because it's like...
Yeah.
If you, the main character, Rastignac, like, he was still hopeful that he could find all the things he needed to provide for himself and for his family, right? He was young, naive. They captured that component of it too, that, like, he kind of gave up his studies in pursuit of the social life, which, maybe wasn't the smartest thing to do.
And gambling
and things like that. So they show his, like, folly in that adventure, but they don't really show, like, he still continues that pursuit. And so I think, I don't know, I guess I have a hard time, because I think that maybe with everything that's happening in the world, it's easy to get kind of cynical about the way things are turning. And so I like to still have a bit of some hopeful character, that there's something you can kind of hold on to, the beauty of parts of life. Whereas if all the characters are teaching you the same lesson, it can be a bit disheartening.
Yeah. And I do think it was very interesting that he has another one on the shelf there called Lost Illusions, and that's a pretty thick book. And it's a similar theme. Like, it's a young man trying to get, like, journalist wants to become famous or make it in Parisian society, and it's his kind of, like, his fall, in a way. Like,
they all fall. Like, every single character falls to some degree, right? And But
one thing I want to kind of redeem Rastignac is that this Vautrin character, it really did feel like, you have your good angel and your bad angel sitting on either shoulder. And on the one side, you have this Vautrin character who's so absolutely cynical and pessimistic and sort of malicious, and uses people for his own ends. And, he just wants, he wants to escape to create, like, a plantation somewhere in the U.S.
Like, literally have slaves.
and have slaves, and he, like, kind of, like...
Cruel.
Yeah, very cruel man, right? And
the most, like, dark, jaded person you could ever
encounter.
Come across.
Yeah. And then on the other side, you have Bianchon, who was, like, a medical student, right? One of the friends of Rastignac, who was living in this boarding house as well. And, they're both kind of selling every piece of item that they own so that, old Goriot, has a proper send-off, right? And Bianchon actually has a conversation with Rastignac earlier on where he does give that more of a positive message about, hope and caring, and, there was that other option. And Bianchon actually criticized, cheekily criticized Rastignac when he's like, oh, you're still going around, trying to...
That's true. His
trying to make
character
it
was
up in the
redeeming.
ladder.
Bianchon's character was redeeming, but it was, you don't learn enough about him.
Yeah, he's kind of like
he's
peripheral...
He's a backside.
Yeah, he's a peripheral character. But there was that... But what I liked was there was this moral dilemma that Rastignac...
Compass, kind of, right?
Yeah.
He was the moral compass,
and,
for sure.
And throughout the novel, Rastignac did deny Vautrin's satisfaction of submitting to him.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the end, it's a little bit ambiguous. It's left off a little bit ambiguous in terms of, what Rastignac's future is and what his decisions will be. Because to me, I guess maybe I think you felt the same way, but he realized that he has to play the game. And I felt, in a way, when he goes back to his lover, which was one of the daughters of old Goriot, because he realized how she treated her father.
But you don't want to give away then.
No, of course not. But there is a sense of, I felt like there was a sense in which it's like it was payback. Like, it was jaded, which was speaking to the pessimistic aspect, right? But no, but I'm just saying, I guess I'm veering off my point. My point was that, he did remove himself of Vautrin. He did deny him, even when he was Vautrin tried to make him into his debt.
But in the way he went down the same path as Vautrin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I didn't like about it. It was it was almost teaching you this lesson of you need to be jaded to survive.
Right.
If you show that softness or compassion to others, all you'll be is sucked dry and left behind, which I don't think that's true. I just, from my life, I don't think that that's true. That's such a negative lens to look through. It's when you show compassion to others, there's lessons so much greater that are redeeming and fulfilling in life than being used occasionally. I don't know.
No, I agree.
So I think that's why I had a problem with it, because it almost endorses being jaded and cynical towards the world. That you have to have that to survive, and I just disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there's a point that don't be so naive that everything will go your way simply by being kind, generous, and good. But
he doesn't. I'm gonna push back.
Okay.
He doesn't necessarily, Balzac. If you look at it from the Balzac's perspective when he's writing it as a narrative, right? He makes Eugene make his own decisions, but if you read it closely, it's like Dostoevsky. It's like there's always an ambiguity there. It's hard to tell what Dostoevsky is saying behind the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that there is a sense in which the narrator does show it. He shows the sort of the depths that people can fall into and the terrible things that they do and the way in which they justify the terrible things that they do. But he's not condoning it.
No.
Right? The author himself does take a dispassionate... No, not even a dispassionate. He does show, that, in many ways that there is that complexity, but he doesn't endorse necessarily a negative view. He shows different perspectives coming through, but then he does show
but
through the ending.
They're all tragic.
They're all
tragic. All the characters' lives were tragic.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. There wasn't one person who kind of wormed their way, through and showed some sort of positive.
Yeah.
They all were tragic, and I think, I don't know, I actually find the tragedy less believable when they're all tragic plot lines.
I see.
You know what I mean? You have to, in order to, that's what I love about Anna Karenina, is that it's a tragic ending, but characters in that novel as well that show life isn't all tragic, right? both Anna Karenina, although her character ends up being tragic, the other characters still show how it's not only one path. Like, you know, it seems
there are alternative outcomes.
Right, like the outcome isn't, no matter what you do, tragic.
Right, yeah.
And there's more even complexity to tragedy. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, a part of that...
I thought it showed the complexity of tragedy, though.
My point is that Anna Karenina is a tragedy,
yeah.
but there's characters that are not tragic in it,
yeah.
which
so
the light and the dark that are balanced. This is like...
Right. This is all dark.
This is all dark, and even when you see Goriot's character, who is like an angel, and you say, or the all-giving father, he was already on the path of tragedy way before the ending. Right? That was obvious from the beginning that he was going down a tragic path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I said, I just think you get pulled into a tragedy more, and when the life story is balanced with good and tragedy a little bit better. Like, the only thing Goriot had to say that was where he had fond memories of his daughters were when they were really young before they married, and that was like a tiny little glimpse. It's like, if there was more moments of tenderness from the daughters, which I feel like in a real person, at least in one of the two daughters, and one of them, there would be moment, like the complexity of the father-daughter relationship alone. There's going to, even in their adulthood, show more tenderness than just for financial.
So absolutely.
Right?
But like, I mean, that was hinted at as well, where they wanted to go.
But not enough. Like, it just didn't give me enough. That's all. That's my only criticism.
So I was going to say, they wanted to visit, and there were certain restraints upon them visiting their dying father. I think I see what your point is, and in a sense, it's like, it's almost like caricature where
they all were caricature.
But like, I mean, I guess what I mean, like, he's trying to do something, so he does it full blown, very like paints a black picture, right?
Yeah.
But you're looking more for the variegation and the variety of real life.
Yeah.
That if you want to portray realism, reality as it is, you have to take the light with the dark.
Well,
right?
Your point was that you liked the character development, and you liked the character
insight into the character rather than the development.
To the character.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, to me, it didn't truly teach me enough about the insight of humanity, because it only glossed upon the complexity of it. It only showed, like, the only lesson was, well, not the only lesson, I shouldn't use absolutes, but the main lesson was to be careful, to not be so
naive and
idealistic and compassionate, and only that, right? Or you won't necessarily.
Well, there was compassion. They showed compassion at the end towards the old dying Goriot. I think it's more like self-sacrifice to the point of self-destruction and foolishness, right? From old Goriot's case.
It was almost on either end, right? It's like, if you're only greedy, or if you're... But again, even Goriot's character they had a parallel line, which was also the daughter, what was her name, who was living in the house.
Victorine?
Victorine, yeah. I felt like Goriot and Victorine's characters were very similar.
The young girl who's poor, destitute?
Oh, yeah. Destitute, poor, but still loves and worships her, like, family.
Her father
And her brother.
Who both kind of betrayed her and
left her in a poorhouse, essentially. Yeah. Right, but it's like the same parallel line. I'm like, why is there it was unbalanced, that's what I want to say. That's I keep repeating that.
Yeah.
But like, all the characters were on one side of this kind of narrative.
Yeah.
There wasn't someone else being like, hey, this is something else that can possibly happen with the same storyline.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It makes you think whether he actually even liked Paris. I think it's one of those like...
be in love with the tragedy of Paris.
Well, yeah, it's like kind of like those love-hate things. You love it for its beauty, and it's for its, decadence, and for its, vileness as well.
Or you just wonder what, like,
complicated
happened.
Relationship.
Right, or you just wonder what happened in, like,
Balzac.
His social life.
Well, I mean, I could probably go back here, but I think he was very much in debt much of the time.
And a lot of it...
At the age of 30, he was heavily in debt.
And a lot of it alludes to this idea of, like, constantly getting out of debt. Like, it's so easy to
but
fall into debt, right?
That's
when
how
you're
much
in
of the
social
wealthy
life.
were just like throwing in,
Right.
like,
so you can tell, like, a
and,
lot of it. Maybe that's what makes it so great, in the sense is that obviously it's coming from a part of his own life, right, and his own story. Don't let my review change your thoughts.
I want to give it a 3.9 out of 5.
Okay.
I think that's
I was going to give it a 3.6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was well written. It wasn't I feel like, the last 3 quarters went by quickly.
I was going to say it's a good contrast to the Black Tulip, right? The Black Tulip was so much about light, like it was like the opposite. It was like, you can do, like, just listen to God and follow the love in your heart and everything will go well, despite the fact that you maybe, like, have your head chopped off. It was like too optimistic lens of, like, just find your virtue and you will be fine. And this is the opposite. It's like, even if you have virtue, you may not find the best path. Right? Or it may be hard to live with simply virtue. So it was a good contrast, I think. I'm happy that we kind of read them back to back.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay. Well, listen, if there's so many books that Balzac have written, and I don't know, next time we'll be covering another Balzac story. We might be giving him a rest for a while and go through a circuit of some other books before then. But let us know in the comments if you've read any of Balzac's works and what are your particular favorites. Maybe you like the coffee. Maybe you like Balzac's coffee. It's pretty good. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us. We hope you have a pleasant evening and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.